Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we're doing another spotlight on plugins. Today we're talking about the Chord Kerner, which is a RGP Lua script written by Michael McClennan. Now, a kerner, or to kern something, kerning, means to really deal with the space between characters. Mostly, it refers to words, but in our case, it's actually referring to the suffixes, the chord suffixes. So this Chord Kerner tool, Michael built to help us edit the chord suffixes. Now, if you're familiar with how Finale does this natively, you'd go into the chord definition, select the chord suffix, and then press the edit button to get to this Chord Suffix Editor. I've done a whole video on this. I will put a link right here in the video to that, and you can kind of see for yourself how this works. But if you've spent any amount of time in here, you will realize how much of a pain in the neck this is. The visual feedback is difficult because you can't actually increase the size of this. The way that the positioning options work here, it's very tricky to deal with. It's not the greatest of user interfaces. So basically what Michael did was wrote a Lua script, which I'll pull up now. It's in my RGP Lua folder, Chord Kerner. And this window here essentially replaces that Chord Suffix Editor. It basically does pretty much everything that Chord Suffix Editor does, plus a couple of other things, and but much easier, much better. The user interface is much easier to understand and easier to use. So this is an incredible tool if you've done any amount of work with chord suffixes. This is gonna save your butt. Now, the Chord Kerner will work-ish with JW Lua, but it's much better on RGP Lua. It's much more stable, so I would highly recommend you use this on RGP Lua. And I just did a video on installing RGP Lua and getting the script set up, so I'll put a link right here to that, so if you need to have that as well, you can do that. Now, the one piece of information that you really need to get started with this Chord Kerner is the suffix ID. And you'll notice the very first thing here is chord ID. And if you know how this works, you go back into your chord library. Actually, if you just go to the chord definition, you'll see the suffix ID right here at the bottom. It says ID 29. If you go into the chord suffix selection dialog box, you can actually see all of the suffix IDs. It's the number in the top left corner of each box. And you can see that the 7-flat-9, which is selected, is indeed number 29. But you can edit any of these chord suffixes just by putting in that appropriate chord ID number into the Chord Kerner tool. So we just type in 29, and when you do that, you'll see some things appear, including the 7, the parentheses, this question mark, which is actually the flat symbol. This is using the Finale Maestro text. There's sort of this thing with the new version of Finale and the Smoofle fonts that the characters don't show up correctly in some of these windows. I hope that it's something that they'll fix eventually, but for now we just get a lot of these question marks. But we do know that that's a flat because that's what appears between the parentheses and the 9 in this case. And so now that I have the chord ID typed here, we have the correct suffix showing up in the middle section here, we can start making manipulations. Now, the really brilliant thing about this Chord Kerner is that when you make changes with it, it updates dynamically in the score. Which is something that's sort of somewhat lacking in the chord suffix editor. You can see the suffixes, but again, it's really small. It's difficult to deal with. So the advantages here is that you can really blow up your score to a size that's really usable as you're doing this. And as you make changes, you'll see these things update live, which is really cool. So here's the basics of it. In the center of this window, you have sort of these this long row of check boxes and box numbers with characters in it. This is essentially the suffix, and each slot has its own character, is its own part of the suffix, right? The idea is that you select one of these, and whichever one you select, anything that you do in the top section or the bottom section will affect that selected character. So let's select the second one, the parentheses, and we'll start with the top section here. We have these really handy up, down, left, right arrows, and they do exactly what you would think. You select the parentheses and you press left, and you just saw the parentheses go to the left a little bit. And you can keep pressing left until it gets to a position where you want it. I'll put it back to where it was. It was at 25. I'll talk about these boxes in a second. Right goes right, left goes left, up goes up, down goes down. Now, it's moving by 1 EVPU. And those EVPUs are represented here in the vertical and horizontal fields. These are actually the values of the position of the characters themselves. Now, the one thing to realize is that the way that Finale defines these suffixes relative to the horizontal position is that the horizontal value here is not the distance between one character to the next. So this is not 25 EVPUs from the parentheses to the 7. It's actually 25 EVPUs from the parentheses to the origin of the suffix, which is, if you're looking at the chord root here, it's somewhere just right of the chord root itself. So right about where my arrow is, that's what the origin point, which is why the 7 is set to 2 EVPUs to the right. But the parentheses is going to be 25, and each one after that is going to be a lot larger. So 44, 60, and 82 EVPUs for this right parentheses relative to that origin point all the way over here. It's just weird how Finale does this. It's not referencing from one character to the next. It's referencing to that origin point. It's the same thing for the vertical. The vertical is referencing sort of the baseline that runs across here. So, some of these are just, they're usually 1, 2, or 3 or something. Sometimes the flats and sharps need to go a lot higher to kind of put them in a decent position. But most of the time they're going to be 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or something. So that's essentially how the kerning of it works. You can choose left and right, and so we can kind of tighten this whole thing up if we want. We can move the parentheses to the left. We can move the flat to the left. We can move the 9 to the left. And we can move the parentheses to the left. Now, what I just did was I moved each of these characters individually like that, which can be kind of a pain if you've got a lot of these to do. So there is this great little option here called Auto Adjust. And with this option checked, whichever box you check here, it's going to adjust the left or right altogether, this one and any character to the right of it. So I've got 2 checked, but it's going to adjust 2, 3, 4, and 5 altogether. So now when I press right, you're going to see that whole structure of the parentheses flat 9 move to the right or the left. This doesn't work up and down. This only works with the left and right. So if I choose up here, you're only going to move the one that's checked. But it's obviously more useful with the left and right. So I use this option a lot when I'm using this tool. Just have that auto adjust. It makes it a little bit easier. All right, so that's how that works. Now, to the right of the up, left, right, down, and vertical, horizontal options, we have delete and insert. If you've tried to add characters in the middle of a suffix in the Chord Suffix Editor, you'll understand how much of a pain in the neck this is, but Michael's made this a lot easier with this tool, with these 2 options here. And the way this works is that you insert character before, and then you have to put in a number here, and the number here represents the slot as represented down here. So let's say I want to change the 9 to 13. Incidentally, I should have pointed out that you can directly go into these boxes here and change the numbers, and you can see that it just went from 9 to 1. There's other things you can type whatever you want into these boxes. So, but let's say we want to change this to 7 flat 13, right? But we need an extra character before the parentheses. Well, I could change this to the 3 and then add the parentheses here, but also I could use the insert character before. And I want to insert before slot 5, so that's how we're going to do that. We're going to enter 5 here and press enter. And we're going to press the insert button. And you'll see that it will add an extra character here after 4, and it will actually copy the 4th one. So that's why you're getting 2 1s, but then you can just change that 1 to a 3. And just like that, we can change that flat 9 to flat 13. The delete character at sort of works the same way. So if we wanted to delete that character that we just added, what we're going to do is delete character at slot 5. So whatever is in slot 5 here, we press the delete button, and it deletes it. And now we get our character back. We can change that to 9, again, to get us our 7 flat 9 suffix once more. All right, so that's what's going on with the top half of the Chord Kerner, and this is sort of the most useful part of this, I think, if you're adjusting spacing and stuff like that. This is the key to that. Below that, we have other options too. So we can change the fonts if we want, and every time you check something, it will show you what font's being used. So, the characters here in this default document are Times New Roman. the music character is Finale Maestro in this case. You can change the font to something else if you want. Or you can do other things here, like let's say there's all these options to bold, italicize, underline, highlight, and this is fixed size text. So if we wanted to bold face the 9 for some reason, we just check that box and it does it, or italicize it, underline it, hide it. The fixed size text, I believe, when you do that, it actually has to fixed size the whole suffix, so you can't actually have one fixed size characters against all the others. So that F box for fixed will do the entire suffix. You can also change the size really easily. So if we wanted that to be a little bit smaller, we can make that 9 point instead of 11 point. Just it's really easy to manipulate things with all this stuff. And we also have I mentioned you can press the font to change the font if you want. If we wanted to change from Finale Maestro, let's say we're going to change to the Finale Jazz text here for the flat. We could do that, and now we get our jazz flat, and that's rather large, so let's make it 12. But we can also choose a symbol, so if we wanted to change this from flat 9 to sharp 9, we just press the symbol. We get the symbol selection dialog box. It'll pull up the one that you have selected, the flat. You can just change it to sharp, press select, and now we have the A7 sharp 9. And of course, when we do this, the sharps and flats don't always end up in the same plane, so we can just adjust that a little bit to make that a little bit better. So you can see how easy it is to do this with these left and right buttons and everything. All right, so that's kind of what's going on with the bottom section here. There's a couple other options here. There is this thing called is number. If you have a number marked here, you could check the is number. This is sort of an old school way of dealing with suffixes in Finale. With this checked, you can actually use multiple characters in this slot. So if I had checked this, I could actually type the number 13 in here. There's sort of a disadvantage to that in that you can't individually manipulate the 1 and the 3 in those cases. So it's not really done in the modern suffix libraries, so you're probably not going to see this checked when you're dealing with your libraries, and it's probably not necessary to use it. It's sort of the same thing with the prefix with. You have the option for flat, sharp, minus, or plus. If I can go back to the suffix editor real quick here, just to show you the equivalent of that. This is the number. So again, if you have that checked, then this can actually be 2 characters, 13, for example. With the prefix, you can choose whether or not you want to prefix the 7 with a flat, a sharp, a minus, or a plus. Again, it's not really recommended. It's not really done anymore because when you do this, you have less control of the size, the positioning of all these characters, so it's almost kind of not necessary. I don't remember exactly why these were here originally. Maybe it was to save space, to save characters in this chord suffix editor, but it's not really necessary. You can have as many characters as you want in the suffix, so I'm not sure why they did that originally, but with anything with Finale, once it's in the program, it never actually leaves. So that's what's going on there. I wouldn't worry too much about the with prefix and the is number options. There's these other options on the bottom right here called auto Kern, and essentially what these will do is, if you get yourself in a weird position where your suffixes are kind of, too scrunched or way too far or something, who knows how you may find yourself in this scenario, but the auto Kern will actually do it individually or more usefully by the full suffix. If you just press that button, it'll kind of reset everything to a decent spacing, and then from here you can start to adjust as needed. You can do it individually for the character, but I think the most useful thing is the full suffix. There is a tight and loose slider even for this, which does produce some variation to this. There's not a whole lot of change to how tight it is or how loose it is, but it does actually affect it a little bit. Okay, and then there's one more thing in this window that's worth noting. There's this button for enable, and there's this thing grayed out. If I press the enable button, you're going to see this Chord Librarian and set all roots to. This is something that definitely does not exist in the Chord Suffix Editor. Now, the reason why this enable button is here is to prevent you from accidentally hitting this Chord Librarian button, which is really important because this Chord Librarian will do something incredible to your file. And if you're working in a file that you actually need, this is really not a good idea to do that. So this is why this enable button is here. And basically what it does is when you have that enabled and you press the Chord Librarian, first it's going to give you a warning very loudly. Do not run this plugin on a working file. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to create a reference file for your chord suffixes, and I'm just going to click yes so you can so I can show you exactly what happens. You see that it deleted all of the music that I had there, and it changed a whole bunch of things. And what it did was actually create a running chord suffixes one at a time, and added measure numbers so that you can actually see which chord suffix ID each suffix is. So if you look at this, the major 7 chord suffixes is going to be ID 7 because it's measure 7. So basically they're all added in a row. Here's the 11th suffix is major 7 flat 5, etc. And this will go all the way as far as you have chord suffixes. So however many you have at the end of the file, you'll get to the last one. I should zoom out a little bit here so we can see this. The last one, I guess, is 177 in this chord suffix library. So this is really useful if you're doing specific work on your chord suffix library and you're going to export this library afterwards. Definitely worth doing. And also you can choose to set the roots if you want. So if you wanted to see them all with B flat or C, let's try that again, or F sharp. Well, it's off by, oh, that's interesting. I bet I know why that is, because I have a key signature in here. I didn't even realize about this, but actually if you're in the key of C, these will show up as B flat. Since I'm in D, they're showing up as C. So they're transposing chords, I suppose. So yeah, so then you can kind of see how the suffixes look against the chord roots and everything. So that's the Chord Librarian. Again, this enable button is here so that you don't accidentally do this on a file that you actually need. So yeah, so that is basically the Chord Kerner Lua script in a nutshell. Again, if you do a lot of work editing suffixes, this is a godsend. I mean, this is an incredible tool to use. And I'm going to actually move on. I'm going to show you a couple of other files. This is the Oh Danny Boy project file that I showed you, I think, when I was demonstrating the updates to version 27.2. This is Darcy James Argue's chord suffix library that he created for 27.2. And I'm just going to go in here and show you a couple things, particularly on this chord suffix A7 sharp 11. If I go into the suffix editor here. What's interesting is that, oh, I wanted to show this. I'll say this is 84. Sorry, so we're going to go to suffix 84 here. Yeah, and you know, sometimes with these fancy fonts, you're barely getting any information in the characters here. So you can see the 7. The parentheses is a weird character because this comes from the Finale Jazz font, the sharp, again, from the Finale Jazz font. And then this is a single character for the 11. This is a unique part of this chord suffix library, that the 11 and the 13 are individual characters. They're not two separate ones. I talk about this in the 27.2 video. I'm not going to linger on this too much, but just to point out how this works, and in case you're editing a suffix library that looks like this, sometimes you have to be aware of this. There was actually a ton, just briefly kind of repeat what I said in that other video, there was actually a ton of programming that went into version 27.2 specifically in order to get stuff like that to work, because when you type 7 parentheses sharp 1 1, that's 2 individual times that you're pressing 1, but Finale needs to recognize that with this particular chord library, you're using 1 character, the 11 character, and then the parentheses. There's some other nifty stuff that he did along the same lines where it's actually different types of parentheses. These are actually different characters, the double wide parentheses versus the triple tall parentheses, I guess, versus the regular parentheses. These are separate characters, so there's some interesting programming that had to go into this. Now, this is all leading to what I want to show you in my next file. So when I first looked at this this project in 27.2 and looked at Darcy's chord suffix library, I was thoroughly impressed. I was actually kind of blown away. I was really impressed with how well and how complete this suffix library is. And I was a little bit jealous because I wanted to use it. However, I don't use handwritten fonts at all, really. So but he didn't create one, an equivalent non-handwritten font version. And I always use Arial font for my chord suffixes. So I spent some time earlier this year recreating his suffix library with the Arial font, and that's the file that I'm showing you right here. This is my modification of Darcy's chord suffix library using the Arial font. It's actually mostly Arial narrow. There's a few characters that use Arial, and the music characters are Finale Maestro. And essentially this is pretty much a duplicate of Darcy's library. It was an extensive amount of work, honestly, because I did some font replacement and had to do a lot of character manipulation. And I used that chord suffix, Chord Kerner from McClennan exclusively to create this library. Now, I think Darcy's library had 172 characters in or suffixes in it. I ended up with 223. I did add a few more. Darcy doesn't believe, I guess, in the 7-5 suffix. So, and I know that's something that people do use. So I did add all of the flat 5s to his suffixes in addition to the sharp 11. So those are there as well. And I also made some other modifications, a couple of other additions that I wanted to see for me. And so now I've got this amazing Arial chord suffix library, which I have decided very generously to share with all of you, my Conquering Finale supporters. So that's a good bonus for you. So somewhere on the web page where I'm posting this video, I will post a link so that you can download the chord library. All you have to do is load that library into whatever template or whatever file you want to use, and you will have this 223 suffixes available at your fingertips. Now, I will recommend some settings that go along with this because the suffixes are built to a certain size, and you're going to kind of want to match the chord roots to that size. So I'll just show you in the document options really quick what I'm talking about. For the fonts, the symbol here, I'm using Arial Narrow 16. The suffixes is Arial Narrow 14, and the alterations are Finale Maestro 19. Now this is a little bit larger than the default music font, or the default Finale font. I believe they use Times New Roman 12 for the symbol, so between 12 and 16 is quite a jump, although the Arial Narrow font itself is intrinsically smaller, so maybe it's not a 4-point jump, but more realistically a 3-point jump, which is still pretty large. This is just out of personal experience. I've never heard a musician complain that the chord symbols were too large. In fact, the only complaints I ever get is that chord symbols are too small. So I took that as a hint that if anything, I should err on the side of too large with these suffixes. So they are built at Arial Narrow 16. Which is a little bit on the larger side than you might be used to, but I think they, with the narrow version of Arial, they really kind of stick together well, or they compress really well. So you can get a lot of chords on a measure even at this size. And I've also talked about this in some other videos, but there is this option in the chords menu to actually scale the chords, and currently I have this at 100%. I've talked about how this doesn't particularly work very well because it doesn't scale the space between the suffix characters correctly. However, you can kind of get away with going down to about 90% if you want just a little bit smaller. The space between the suffix characters don't get too wide when you do it like that. I wouldn't go much more than 105 with this particular library because I did build them intrinsically kind of tight. Anything more than 105 and the characters are going to start overlapping. So, but at 100% you get Arial 16 and Arial 14 for the main part of the suffixes. So, and also these numbers here, the chord alteration baseline adjustments. You know what I'll do is I'll also put a kind of a README document that you can download that will have all of these settings. It'll have these settings here plus the font sizes and characters that you need to use in the document options to kind of replicate this particular chord library so that it looks good. Again, you can download the suffixes, but unless it's kind of matched with the correct chord root, it may not look quite the same. So anyway, so there you go. This is all for you, the Arial chord suffix library. I'm going to post it on the video. I'm not going to charge anything for it. Of course, there's always a donate button on the Conquering Finale website, so if you feel like this is something that's useful, a donation will never be rejected. So yeah, so there you go. So that is the Chord Kerner, and I gave you a little bonus material from. I'm going to send you my Arial chord suffix library if you're interested. Again, all of that was done exclusively with Michael McClennan's Chord Kerner. So if you have your own suffix library that needs some similar work, I highly, highly, highly recommend going and getting this Chord Kerner. And I will put a link to Michael's website where you can download this RGP Lua script and start working in it on your own. So yeah, so there you go. This is a bit of an extensive video, but it is sort of a big script and an important one at that. So I thought it was worth spending some time. So hopefully this has helped. I really appreciate you watching as always. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I will see you soon on the next video.